SVC Chaos, SLK vs Capcom.
Violent Ken is a corrupted, brainwashed version of Ken Masters, who has haunted the shadows of the franchise for decades. Unlike evil Ryu, who wrestles with the Satsui no Hado inside, Violent Ken doesn't harbor that same kind of inner darkness. Instead, he's a victim of the dictator M. Bison's psycho power, which twists his fiery spirit and rivalry with Ryu into something just as dangerous. Let loose in another company's game. Violent Ken, known as Brainwashed Ken in Japan, made his playable debut in SNK vs Capcom SVC Chaos, a game developed not by Capcom, but by SNK, as the third arcade title in a series of crossovers between the two companies. Here, Violent Ken was both a sub-boss and hidden character. His flames turned purple, his once boisterous personality was reduced to mostly snarls and growls, mirroring the same feral aggression as Orochi Yori from the King of Fighters. Yet despite his corruption, Ken's ending in the game was almost as mundane as regular Ken's. Unconscious on the ground, he awakens to the sound of his wife, Eliza. The influence of psycho power seems to have receded, and the two walk off together, with no recognition of how close he came to being lost forever. A puppet of psycho power. But SVC Chaos wasn't the first time Ken lost control of himself. The idea of a brainwashed Ken stretches back to the early 90s. In 1993, manga artist Masaomi Kanzaki serialized a story in Family Computer magazine, notably not only for including Ken's corruption counterpart, but also for the first visual depiction of his and Ryu's master, Goken. In this tale, Bison used a drug called Doll to control fighters, and Ken fell under its influence. Eventually, it would be his friend and rival Ryu who finally snapped him out of it, not with fists, but with his words, yelling at Ken until he remembered who he really was. This theme repeated itself in 1994's Street Fighter II, the animated movie, where Bison targeted Ryu following his victory over Sagat. But Ryu was difficult to track down, alone and always on the move seeking his next battle. When Bison discovered Ken had trained alongside his primary target, Bison went after him instead. Utilizing technology and psycho power, Bison twisted his friendly rivalry with Ryu into a weapon. Once again, it was his old training buddy who would get through to him, not by fighting, but through his words and through memory. The theme of Ken falling under outside influence appeared again in several comics. In Udon's Street Fighter II Turbo, Ken and other fighters were controlled by Shadaloo until the Psycho Drive was destroyed. And in their Street Fighter vs Darkstalkers series, Lord Raptor hijacked his mind, forcing friends like Elena, Sakura, and Ryu to try and bring him back from the brink. During one of Ken's darkest moments, he almost killed Rufus after Ken's self-anointed biggest rival challenged him to a fight. A Chinese 8-volume graphic novel series of SNK vs Capcom SVC Chaos was also released, where Ken is brainwashed by Red Aremer. Yes, from Ghosts and Goblins. Okay. Eventually, he fights Ryu and loses, which returns him to his old self. Across all of these versions, one theme stands out. Ken is vulnerable to outside influence, his fear that he cannot keep pace with Ryu often being used against him. But it's his ties to others, especially Ryu and his love Eliza, that brings him back from the edge. The shadow follows him everywhere. Violent Ken wasn't just confined to SVC Chaos. Though Ken is not named as either Violent Ken or Brainwashed Ken in the Alpha series, it does include a fight against the psycho power-controlled Ken in Ryu's Alpha 3 path. Later, in Ultra Street Fighter II, released in 2017, Bison once again brainwashes him. In this game, Violent Ken is faster and more powerful than regular Ken, and he gains the Rasetsu Kyaku, a teleport-like dash that closes distances in an instant. But once Bison is defeated, Ken finally breaks free. He vows to find his own path, separate from Ryu's, though he insists that his old friend had better be waiting for him at the end of it. He would also appear in the tactical role-playing game Project X Zone 2, briefly serving as an enemy before Ryu snaps him back with a Shin Shoryuken, mirroring the way Ken once rescued evil Ryu in Namco X Capcom. And while he isn't directly named in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, one of Ken's alternate colors is a clear homage to his violent Ken appearance in SVC Chaos. In Classic Mode, he gets paired alongside certain characters, notably Dark Samus, who, like him, have been corrupted or controlled. Why Ken falls to darkness? Capcom themselves have weighed in on what makes violent or brainwashed Ken tick. According to their Street Fighter activity report, the Satsui no Hado does not exist within Ken the way it does for Ryu. But Ken's fiery personality, combined with his occasional feelings of being overshadowed by Ryu, leaves him open to Bison's Psycho Power. Psycho Power feeds on fear and suffering, and in Ken's case, it turns his trademark flames purple and fills his strikes with hatred. The only thing strong enough to break that grip is memory, particularly the sight of Ryu's red headband, the gift Ken once gave him as a sign of their bond. Capcom also makes it clear here, this has only happened in a parallel universe. So far. The future of Violent Ken. That brings us to the present. Violent Ken hasn't surfaced in Street Fighter VI, but is the stage being set for his return. Although the Satsui no Hado does not reside in Ken, director Takayuki Nakayama has suggested that Psycho Power and the Satsui no Hado are one and the same. And in the side reader featuring Dalsim and Oro, it appears that the mystical powers found in Street Fighter may all stem from the same source. Couple this with the fact that Ken is already walking a dark road, consumed by the idea of vengeance against JP, the man who framed him and destroyed his life, as well as Sagat's World Tour mission, ominously titled Satsui no Hado, where the Emperor states that every fighter in search of strength must face the killing intent one day, and you start to see the potential. Could Ken's grief, anger, and thirst for revenge leave his mind vulnerable once again? Only time will tell. But for now, that wraps up Violent Ken, a character that proves that even the strongest warriors can become twisted by fear and psycho power. If you enjoyed this look into his shadowy path, give the video a like, share it with your fellow fighting game fans, and subscribe so you don't miss the next fighting trivia spotlight. And if you'd like to help keep this series alive, consider joining my Patreon. Your support helps me continue unearthing the darker corners of fighting game history. Remember to be excellent to yourselves and one another, and I'll see you in the next spotlight.